I used to believe I was the kind of man who could handle anything life threw at him. No challenge was too great, no sacrifice too big. Yet, deep down, I carried this constant fear that I wasn't enough. Not for myself, not for society, and certainly not for Sophia, the woman I loved more than anything. Sophia and I had a beautiful relationship, or at least I thought we did. But as time went on, I started to feel the pressure of expectations. She deserved a man who could give her the world, someone who had achieved everything, someone who wasn't just getting by. Meanwhile, I was struggling to climb the career ladder, living paycheck to paycheck, barely able to afford the occasional dinner date. What made it harder was the way I viewed success. Growing up, I was taught that a man's worth was tied to his status, the car he drove, the house he owned, the wealth he could provide. And here I was, renting a tiny apartment and driving an old sedan with more quirks than I cared to admit. My pride wouldn't let me share these insecurities with Sophia. Instead, I buried them deep, convincing myself that walking away would spare her from my shortcomings. Looking back, it's painful to admit how much fear controlled me. I feared failure, feared not being able to give her the life she deserved, and most of all, I feared losing her respect. These fears created a wall between us, a wall I thought was protecting her, but in reality it was shutting her out. And then there were the whispers in my mind, the doubts I couldn't shake. What if she falls out of love with me because I'm not successful enough? What if someone better comes along, someone who can give her what I can't? These thoughts became a relentless storm, feeding my insecurities until I convinced myself that letting her go was the only option. But love isn't about perfection. It's about connection, trust, and vulnerability. I know that now. At the time, though, I was too caught up in my own pain to see it. I thought I was sparing her, but in reality, I was running from my own reflection. Sophia didn't see me the way I saw myself. She loved me for who I was, flaws and all. But I couldn't believe it. My fears had created a bubble around me, one that kept me from feeling her love fully. It was this belief bubble, this flawed idea of what a man should be, that led me to make the hardest decision of my life. I chose to leave her. I still remember the day I decided it was over. It wasn't a sudden thing, it had been building up for months, even years. The weight of my own insecurities and the pressure to succeed in a world that seemed to measure everything by wealth and status had crushed me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was failing her, failing us. Sophia never asked for much. She didn't need expensive gifts or lavish vacations. She needed me. She needed my time, my attention, my presence. But I couldn't give her that. Not fully. I was so wrapped up in the idea of providing that I lost sight of what really mattered. I thought that by sacrificing my happiness and constantly chasing success, I was doing the right thing. But every day, the gap between us grew wider. I'd come home exhausted from work, barely able to keep my eyes open, only to find Sophia trying to engage with me. She'd ask about my day, about my thoughts, but all I could do was nod, barely listening. We'd sit in silence, two people who once shared everything, now drifting apart. It wasn't that I didn't love her. I loved her more than anything. But love, I realized too late, wasn't enough when you don't have the emotional resources to nurture it. I felt like I was always running on empty, and the more I tried to push through, the more I felt like a fraud. I wasn't the man she deserved. I wasn't the partner she needed. And the worst part was, I wasn't even being honest with her about how I felt. Then, one evening, as I watched her do something so simple as setting the table, I had a moment of clarity. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was terrified. Terrified of never being enough. Terrified of letting her down and being seen as weak. What kind of man couldn't provide for his wife? What kind of man couldn't even give her the most basic form of attention and care? In that moment, the decision was made. It wasn't even about us anymore, it was about me. I thought that leaving was the only way to save her from the burden of being with someone who couldn't meet her needs. I convinced myself that she'd be better off without me. That she'd find someone who could give her the future I couldn't. So, I did it. I told her it was over. I broke her heart. And in the process, I broke my own. But as I walked away from her, there was this hollow feeling inside me, a nagging doubt that I couldn't shake. Did I just make the biggest mistake of my life? Or was I doing the right thing for both of us? It didn't matter. I had already made my choice, and now I had to live with it. The days after I left Sophia felt like walking through fog. At first, there was a sense of relief, a quiet, unsettling relief. I convinced myself that I had done the right thing. But the more time passed, the more I realized just how empty my life had become. I had all this space, all this freedom. And yet, I felt more alone than I ever had before. I threw myself into work, thinking that maybe, just maybe, success would fill the void. But it didn't. I'd go to the office, close deals, sign contracts, and come home to an apartment that felt like a cold, lifeless shell. There were no warm conversations waiting for me, no laughter filling the rooms, no gentle touch of Sophia's hand on my shoulder as she asked me about my day. Instead, there was silence. Silence and the echo of my own thoughts. Every night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I had let her slip away. The thought of her, her smile, her laughter, the way she looked at me like I was the only person in the world, haunted me. I had pushed her away, and now I was living in the aftermath of my own decision. I tried to distract myself. I picked up extra hours at work, started going out with friends more, tried dating a few women, just to fill the emptiness. But nothing worked. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had lost something precious, something irreplaceable. The thought of her moving on with someone else ate at me. Every time I saw a couple together, I felt this pang in my chest. Was she out there somewhere, with someone who could give her everything I couldn't? But it wasn't just about Sophia anymore. I was angry at myself for not being the man she needed. Angry at myself for thinking that success was the answer to everything. What good was being successful if you had no one to share it with? What was all the money and career advancement worth when you had no one to come home to? And still, I told myself I had done the right thing. I was doing this for her. For us. But deep down, I knew I was lying. I couldn't escape the truth for long. I had been running from myself, and I couldn't outrun the reality that I had lost the one person who truly mattered to me. Months passed, and life seemed to move on without me. I buried myself in my work, my social life, and a constant stream of distractions, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the gnawing emptiness. I told myself that leaving Sophia had been the right thing, but deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. I wasn't moving on, I was just running from the truth. It wasn't until that day at the coffee shop that everything changed. I was standing in line, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I heard a voice, a familiar voice, calling my name. I froze. I knew that voice. I turned, and there she was. Sophia. It was like time had stopped, and for a moment, all the noise around me faded away. Her face was still the same, beautiful, radiant, but there was something different about her now. She looked at peace. For a second, I didn't know what to say. All the thoughts that had been racing through my mind since the breakup came crashing into me. The regret. The anger. The doubt. I was suddenly overwhelmed with so many emotions I didn't know how to process. Sophia smiled softly, the kind of smile that used to melt my heart. "Michael," she said, her voice gentle but filled with a quiet strength. "It's good to see you." I stood there, dumbfounded, unsure of how to respond. The last time I had seen her, I had broken her heart. I had walked away, convinced that I was doing the right thing, but now, seeing her standing before me, I realized how wrong I had been. "You look good," I managed to say, my voice a little shakier than I wanted it to be. Sophia chuckled softly, as if she could sense the storm of emotions brewing inside me. "I'm doing okay. Life has moved on, Michael." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Life had moved on. But had it? Was I the one left behind, stuck in the past, unable to face the truth of my decision? We sat down at a nearby table, and she told me about her life since the breakup. She had traveled, started a new job, met new people, and found happiness in ways I never thought possible for her. I could tell she was different, not just in the way she looked, but in her confidence and the way she carried herself. It stung, but I had to admit, I was glad to see her happy. And yet there was this part of me that couldn't help but feel the weight of regret. Had I really given her the space to grow? Or had I selfishly trapped both of us in a relationship that I wasn't ready to fully commit to? As we spoke, the realization hit me. I hadn't been leaving her to give her a better life. I had been leaving her because I was too scared to face my own inadequacies. The fear of not being good enough had clouded my judgment. And in doing so, I had pushed away the one person who had truly believed in me. But the worst part was this: in all that time, I had never truly understood what love was. It wasn't about status or wealth or success. It was about trust, support, and being there for each other, no matter what. And I had thrown all of that away because I couldn't see past my own fears. As the conversation with Sophia continued, I felt the weight of every word we spoke. The distance between us wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional. I could feel it in every awkward pause, every hesitant glance. There was a part of me that wanted to reach out, to tell her everything that had been weighing on my chest for months, but I didn't know how. The truth felt like a burden I wasn't ready to carry, even though deep down, I knew it was the only thing that could set me free. When we finished our coffee, I walked her out, the tension in the air palpable. I knew I couldn't let her go again, not without addressing what had happened between us. But what could I say? How could I apologize for making the worst decision of my life? We stood outside the cafe for a moment, and I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a long while. She wasn't the same woman I had left behind. She was stronger, more confident, and happier than I'd ever seen her. And that made me realize something painful: she had moved on. Not just from me, but from the version of herself that had been tied to me. She had found her own path, and I had no right to disrupt it. "I've missed you," I finally said, my voice thick with emotion. It was true. I had missed everything about her. I had missed the way she cared for me, the way she always believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I missed the simplicity of being loved without expectations, without the need to prove myself. Sophia looked at me, her eyes softening for a moment, but there was something guarded in her gaze now. "I miss you too, Michael. But I can't go back. We both need to keep moving forward." Her words cut deep, but I knew they were true. She had given me every chance she could, and I had wasted it. I had walked away from something precious, thinking that I was doing the right thing. But all I had done was make her feel like she wasn't enough. And that thought crushed me. For the first time, I understood what it meant to truly love someone. It wasn't about sacrificing your own happiness for theirs. It wasn't about trying to be perfect or measuring up to some imagined standard. It was about being there, fully present, supporting them through every high and low, and most importantly, showing up as your true self, flaws and all. In that moment, the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't left her to protect her. I had left because I was afraid of facing my own shortcomings. I thought I had to be someone else to be worthy of her love. But I wasn't being honest with myself or with her. The person I was trying to be wasn't the person she had fallen in love with. And until I could face that truth, I would never be able to move forward, not just with her, but with myself. As I walked away from that cafe, I knew I had a long road ahead of me. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally heading in the right direction. I couldn't undo the past, but I could start building a future based on the truth. It wasn't about reconciling with Sophia anymore. It was about reconciling with myself. In the weeks following that encounter with Sophia, I was left alone with my thoughts, and the silence was deafening. It wasn't just the quiet of being single again, it was the quiet of facing myself. I had always been someone who blamed external factors for my shortcomings. It was easier that way. I blamed the pressure of work, the demands of life, and yes, even Sophia, for the cracks in our relationship. But deep down, I knew the truth was that I had never been fully honest with her or, more importantly, with myself. I had spent my life pretending to be someone I wasn't, trying to meet expectations that weren't mine to begin with. I thought that success, wealth, and status were the keys to happiness and love. But I had gotten it all wrong. Those things had never been enough to fill the emptiness inside me. The truth was, I had been chasing validation from the world instead of peace within myself. So, I decided to change. But it wasn't going to be easy. In fact, the hardest part wasn't the work itself, it was accepting the fact that I needed to work on myself. I had to confront my flaws, my fears, and my deep-seated insecurities. It was a humbling experience, one that forced me to strip away all the facades I had built up over the years. It wasn't enough to just fix my career or my finances, I had to fix who I was as a person. I started by spending more time on the things that truly mattered: my health, my emotional well-being, and my relationships. I sought therapy to understand the root of my fears and the way I had always avoided vulnerability. I began meditating, something I had once scoffed at, and to my surprise it brought me a sense of peace I hadn't known I was capable of. Slowly, I started to rebuild the trust one had lost in myself, bit by bit. The most difficult part, however, was learning to be comfortable in my own skin. For so long, I had believed that I needed to be someone else to be worthy of love and success. I needed to be the confident, successful, powerful man I thought everyone expected me to be. But I realized that I had been running away from the very thing I had to embrace: vulnerability. Vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was the ability to accept that I wasn't perfect, and that was okay. That was human. The more I focused on self-improvement, the more I began to see the world differently. I wasn't looking for external validation anymore, I was learning to validate myself. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth to anyone, especially not to Sophia. I realized that what she had given me wasn't just love, it was a lesson. She had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and her belief had always been the catalyst for my growth. But now, I had to learn to believe in myself without needing someone else's approval. As time passed, I felt lighter. I wasn't constantly striving to be perfect or pretending to have it all together. I was learning to embrace the messy, complicated parts of me, the parts that made me human. And with that newfound self-acceptance came a quiet confidence. I wasn't who I thought I was supposed to be. I was who I was always meant to be, and that in itself was enough. As I continued down this road of self-improvement, something shifted within me. The healing wasn't immediate, nor was it perfect, but slowly, the pieces began to come together. I was beginning to feel like myself again, like I was more than just the man I had been before, but something new, something stronger. Yet, even as I was working on becoming better, there was still something gnawing at me. The past wasn't quite finished with me. It lingered in the corners of my mind, like a shadow I couldn't quite outrun. I thought I had let go of Sophia. After all, hadn't I told myself that I needed to move on? But deep down, there was still an attachment, a lingering hope that perhaps, one day, we might find our way back to each other. I had been holding on to that dream, thinking that somehow, it would make everything make sense again. It wasn't until one quiet evening, as I sat in my apartment staring out at the city, that I realized something profound. I wasn't still holding on to her because I loved her. I was holding on to her because I hadn't truly let go of the version of myself that I had been when we were together. I had been using her as an anchor, a way to justify my past mistakes, to keep myself tied to a time when I believed I could have it all: success, love, and happiness. But in reality, that version of me didn't exist anymore, and Sophia wasn't the person who could bring it back. She was no longer the answer. I had been living with this idea that we were meant to be together, but in truth, I had never truly been ready for the kind of love that she deserved. I had needed to grow, to evolve into someone who could give her the love she needed, but that wasn't something I could have done while I was holding on to the past. And that's when I realized something even more important. Letting go wasn't just about releasing Sophia. It was about releasing the old version of myself, the man who had been too afraid to embrace vulnerability, the man who had avoided hard truths for the sake of comfort. I had been clinging to a fantasy of what could have been instead of embracing the reality of what was. So, I made the decision, quietly but resolutely, to let go of the past. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt, moments when I thought I was making a mistake. But with each passing day, I began to feel lighter, freer. I didn't need to have everything figured out, and I didn't need to know exactly what the future held. I just needed to stop looking back and start looking ahead. It was a relief, in a way, to acknowledge that I could love myself without needing to hold on to any one person or any one version of who I had been. I had spent so much of my life clinging to the idea of control, of perfection, that I had forgotten the most important thing. Life was about growth, and growth required change. And so, I let go. Not just of Sophia, but of the person I had been, the man who had held on to old wounds, to old fears, to the mistaken belief that he wasn't enough. In letting go, I was making space for something better, something real. It was scary, yes, but it was also incredibly liberating. The moment of clarity didn't come with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, as I sat with my thoughts and allowed myself to just be. I wasn't defined by the past anymore. I was free to create a future that was all my own. It's funny how life works sometimes. You can spend years looking for something, thinking it's just out of reach, only to realize that it was never about finding the right thing. It was about becoming the right person. As I started to build a life that was authentically mine, I began to notice changes. Not just in how I viewed myself, but in how others saw me. My relationships, my friendships, even my work, all of it began to shift in a positive direction. The weight of the past had finally lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was stepping into the person I was always meant to be. But what truly surprised me was that love, the kind of love I had been looking for all along, didn't come when I was desperately seeking it. It came when I stopped searching for it in all the wrong places. I had been so focused on my past, so convinced that I needed to fix everything, that I had neglected to look at what was in front of me. Her name was Grace. She was nothing like the people I had been with before. We met through a mutual friend, at a small gathering one evening. She was warm, intelligent, and grounded, qualities I hadn't even realized I was looking for. She didn't seem to need me to be anything more than I was, and that, in itself, was a revelation. It was as if I didn't have to prove my worth to her. I didn't have to hide behind any walls or facades. I could just be me, and that was the first time in my life that I felt truly loved for who I was, not for who I pretended to be or for what I could give. Grace didn't care about my status, my past, or my mistakes. She cared about me, about the man I was becoming, not the one I had been. It was a refreshing change, and it was something I had never experienced before. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a quiet understanding that we both had our own journeys, and our paths had simply crossed at the right time. The more I got to know Grace, the more I realized how much I had changed. In the past, I had believed that love was about security. About finding someone who would never let you go, someone who would fit into the mold you had built for yourself. But with Grace, I understood something different. Love wasn't about holding on tight. It was about letting go of control, about allowing someone else to be their true self and accepting them in return. It wasn't about perfection or stability. It was about trust, respect, and mutual growth. In our relationship, I didn't feel the need to be someone I wasn't. I didn't have to chase after external validation or prove that I was worthy of her love. I already knew I was enough, and that was a gift I had never given myself until now. Grace taught me that love is about growth, not about trying to freeze time or make everything fit neatly into the box of what we think it should be. Over time, I realized that my past struggles with Sophia hadn't been failures. They had been lessons, lessons that had shown me what I was capable of, and more importantly, what I was worth. I had to go through all of it, the mistakes, the heartbreak, the self-doubt, to get to this place of self-acceptance. It was because of those struggles that I was able to love Grace in the way she deserved, and to love myself in the process. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic moments of realization. The love that grew between us was slow, steady, and unwavering. It wasn't the kind of love I had imagined in my youth, full of fireworks and passion. It was quieter, deeper, and far more fulfilling. It was the kind of love that comes when you're ready for it, when you've finally learned the value of trust, vulnerability, and self-worth. And in that quiet love, I found something I had been searching for all along: peace. I had spent so many years trying to find my place in the world, trying to find someone to love me for the right reasons. But now, I understood that it wasn't about searching at all. It was about becoming the person who could truly give love and receive it in return. Grace didn't complete me. She didn't fix my flaws. But she did make me realize that love is not something you seek desperately. It's something you grow into, through self-acceptance and mutual respect. And once I finally learned that lesson, I was able to embrace a future full of possibilities. One where I could love and be loved, fully and without fear. Forgiveness is one of those concepts that's easy to understand but difficult to practice. We hear it all the time: let go of grudges, forgive those who've wronged you, and move on. But when it comes to forgiving ourselves, the process becomes far more complex. It's one thing to offer forgiveness to others, but the hardest part, the part one had to learn, was forgiving myself. When it comes to Sophia, I'd spent so much time blaming myself for the failure of our relationship. I told myself I wasn't enough of a partner, wasn't enough of a man, wasn't enough to keep her happy. I had clung to this narrative for so long, believing that my mistakes had ruined everything. And even after our breakup, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow failed her, that there was something I could have done differently to make it work. But over time, I began to understand something important. Holding on to that guilt was only hurting me. Sophia wasn't in my life anymore, and she had moved on in her own way, just as I had. Our relationship had ended, but the weight of my self-blame was something I carried for far too long. It wasn't just affecting my relationship with her, it was affecting every aspect of my life. At some point, I had to make a choice. I could either continue to live in the shadow of my past mistakes, letting them define me, or I could let go of the guilt and forgive myself. I didn't know how I would do it at first. It wasn't something that happened overnight, and it certainly wasn't a clean, clear-cut process. It was messy, complicated, and there were days when I felt like I would never be able to truly forgive myself. But as I continued to work on myself, through therapy, self-reflection, and slowly rebuilding my life, it became clear that forgiveness wasn't about erasing my mistakes. It was about accepting them as part of my journey and learning from them, not letting them control me anymore. It was about acknowledging that I wasn't perfect, that I had made mistakes, but that I was worthy of peace, just like anyone else. I started to realize that the guilt I was holding on to wasn't serving me. It was keeping me stuck in the past, preventing me from moving forward. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I began to say to myself, you did the best you could at the time. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to learn and grow. It wasn't an easy process. There were still moments when I'd feel the pang of regret, the what-ifs that would creep into my mind, trying to convince me that I could have done things differently. But little by little, I learned to let go of those thoughts. I realized that living in the past would only stop me from creating the future I wanted. Forgiving myself also meant giving myself the grace I had so often given to others. I had been kind to others, letting them off the hook for their flaws and shortcomings. But when it came to myself, I had been unforgiving, judgmental, and harsh. That inner critic had been running the show for far too long, and it was time for me to take control. With time, I began to notice a shift. I wasn't carrying around that heavy burden of guilt anymore. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, and I was finally able to breathe freely again. I no longer had to carry the shame of my past mistakes. I was no longer defined by the things I had done wrong but by the lessons I had learned and the person I was becoming. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a one-time event. It was an ongoing process, one that required patience and compassion with myself. And in learning to forgive myself, I began to feel a deeper sense of peace, something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about making peace with it and allowing myself the space to grow beyond it. I had to forgive myself for the man I had been, so I could fully embrace the man I was becoming. The process of self-forgiveness didn't mean erasing my past, it meant accepting it, learning from it, and using it as a foundation for building something better. And in that process, I found peace, peace that I had been searching for all along, but had never realized could only come from within. After months of introspection and healing, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The old me, the one weighed down by guilt, doubt, and fear, was finally starting to fade into the past. I had put in the work. I had faced my mistakes, accepted the lessons, and let go of the shame that had clung to me for far too long. But now, I had to figure out what came next. The idea of love had once felt like something I couldn't handle, something that was too fragile for someone like me. The thought of opening myself up to another person was both exciting and terrifying. Trust had been broken in my past, not just by Sophia, but by my own inability to trust myself, and now I had to find a way to believe in love again. But I wasn't in the same place I had been before. I wasn't looking for validation or someone to fill the void I'd carried around for years. I had learned to fill that space myself. I had developed a new sense of self-worth, independent of anyone else's approval. I wasn't broken anymore. I was whole. That shift in perspective changed everything. It meant that I could approach love from a place of strength, not desperation. I didn't need someone to complete me, I needed someone who would complement my life, who would add to the happiness I had already cultivated. I had spent so many years believing that my happiness depended on another person, but now I realized that happiness was something I had to create for myself first. As I continued to heal, I started to open my heart again, cautiously, but with a sense of hope. I wasn't rushing into anything or looking for a quick fix. I wanted a relationship built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. I didn't need someone to heal my wounds for me, I needed someone who would walk beside me as I continued to grow, someone who valued the journey I had taken to become the person I was now. That's when I met Emily. At first, I wasn't sure if I was ready. She was kind, intelligent, and beautiful in a way that made my heart race, but I couldn't help but question whether I was truly ready for this. Was I ready to let someone into my life? Was I capable of trusting again? It wasn't an easy decision. Trust, after all, isn't something you can just give away, it's earned. But Emily made it easy. She didn't rush me or push me to open up before I was ready. She respected my space, my boundaries, and my past. She didn't see me as a project to fix, she saw me as a person, as someone who had worked hard to rebuild myself. Over time, I realized that my fears of trusting again were not about Emily, they were about me. I was afraid that history would repeat itself, that I would find myself hurt and betrayed again. But what I had to learn was that I couldn't let my past dictate my future. I couldn't live in fear of being hurt again. If I wanted a future full of love and happiness, I had to trust, not just in Emily, but in myself. Gradually, I started to let go of those fears. I allowed myself to be vulnerable again, to share my thoughts, my dreams, and even my insecurities. And in doing so, I realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. It was what allowed me to connect with Emily on a deeper level. It was what allowed us to build something real, something solid, something that had the potential to last. Emily didn't come into my life to save me, she came to share in my journey, to walk alongside me as I continued to grow. Together, we built something beautiful, something that was rooted in mutual respect, trust, and love. She understood that I wasn't perfect, that I had baggage, fears, and past mistakes, but she didn't hold those against me. She accepted me for who I was, flaws and all, and in doing so, she gave me the gift of love in a way that I had never experienced before, and it wasn't just about her accepting me, it was about me accepting myself. I had to learn that love didn't have to come with conditions. It didn't have to be about proving anything or earning validation. Love could simply be about being present with someone, sharing your life, and supporting each other through the ups and downs. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. I no longer carried the weight of the past. I no longer felt like I had to prove myself to anyone. I had found a love that was built on trust, respect, and a deep sense of connection. And in that love, I found a new version of myself, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future held. It wasn't just about finding someone new, it was about finding a new way of loving, a new way of trusting, and a new way of living. And in that, I found the happiness I had been searching for all along. As time passed, I found myself falling deeper into a love I had never thought was possible. Emily wasn't just someone I cared about, she was someone who brought out the best in me, someone who pushed me to be a better person, someone who made me believe in the possibility of second chances. It was as if my whole world had been turned upside down, but in the best way possible. When I had been with Sophia, I thought love was about fulfilling a set of expectations. I thought love was about proving your worth, making sacrifices, and constantly fighting for your place in someone else's life. But with Emily, everything felt different. There was no pressure, no feeling of inadequacy or fear of being abandoned. I wasn't constantly on edge, wondering when the next argument would happen or whether I was doing enough to keep her happy. Instead, love with Emily felt peaceful, natural, and unconditional. It wasn't about meeting someone else's expectations or constantly giving more than I had. It was about sharing moments, big and small, and learning to grow together. It was about giving without expecting anything in return, about understanding each other's flaws, and about finding joy in the little things that life had to offer. It's funny how time and perspective can change the way you see things. I had spent years defining love in a way that was narrow, conditional, and tainted by past hurts. But now, as I looked at Emily, I realized that love wasn't just about holding on to someone for fear of losing them. It was about letting go of your ego, your fears, and your insecurities, and trusting that the person standing beside you will love you for who you truly are, even when you're at your worst. In those early days with Emily, I realized just how much I had been missing in my life. I had been so focused on achieving success, proving my worth, and trying to avoid failure that I had forgotten to appreciate the people who truly mattered. I had neglected the very thing that had always been at the core of my happiness, meaningful connection with another person. With Emily, I didn't feel the need to prove myself anymore. I didn't need to impress her with accomplishments or gestures. She loved me because of who I was, not because of what I had or hadn't done. I could finally breathe, knowing that I was enough, just as I was. That was a revelation, one that came from deep within, and one that I hadn't even known I was searching for. But as much as I appreciated the quiet, peaceful love I had found, I also realized that love, in its truest form, isn't without challenges. Life doesn't stop throwing curveballs just because you've found someone who makes you feel whole. The pressures of the world, of family expectations, of work and responsibilities, still existed. But this time, with Emily by my side, I knew we could face anything together. There were moments when I found myself tempted to slip back into old habits. The fear of rejection, the doubts about my worth, the insecurities about my past mistakes. But every time I felt that old, familiar anxiety creeping in, Emily was there to reassure me. She didn't see me as a failure, she saw me as someone worthy of love, someone who had learned from his past and was ready to build a future. She didn't hold my past against me, instead, she encouraged me to use it as fuel for growth. It wasn't always easy. We had disagreements, of course. Every relationship does. There were moments of misunderstanding and tension. But the difference this time was that I didn't let those moments define us. I didn't let them make me doubt what we had. Emily taught me that love isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about learning how to work through it, how to communicate, and how to understand each other better. And it was in those moments of challenge that I realized something profound. Love isn't just about the highs, the easy moments, or the fairy tale endings. It's about how you show up for each other during the tough times. It's about standing by each other when life feels uncertain. It's about being there when things get difficult, not just when everything is perfect. The more I spent time with Emily, the more I began to understand that love is a choice, not just a feeling. It's a decision you make every day to choose someone, to commit to their happiness, and to share your life with them, even when the path isn't always smooth. And that's what made this love so different from anything I had experienced before. As our relationship deepened, I felt a sense of gratitude I had never known. I had gone through so much pain, so much heartbreak, and so many lessons, but in the end, I realized it was all worth it. If I hadn't made the mistakes I did, if I hadn't gone through the heartache, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have the chance to experience a love that felt so real, so raw, and so fulfilling. I wouldn't have met Emily, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to grow alongside her. So, here I am, at a place I never thought I'd be. I'm in love, truly in love, and I've learned that love isn't about holding on to someone out of fear or insecurity. It's about choosing them every day, building a future together, and supporting each other through life's highs and lows. With Emily, I've found something I thought was impossible: true, lasting love. And it's a love that doesn't come with expectations or conditions. It's a love that's built on trust, on respect, and on the understanding that no matter what happens, we'll face it together, hand in hand. As Emily and I moved forward, I began to realize that life was never going to stop challenging us. In fact, the more we built together, the more obstacles seemed to appear. But this time, I wasn't facing them alone. We were partners, equal players in this game of life, and no matter what came our way, we knew we had each other's backs. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were moments when life felt overwhelming, and the pressures of work, family, and life in general began to weigh heavily on both of us. Emily and I had talked about our dreams, about the future we wanted to build, the life we wanted to create, but it wasn't always easy to make those dreams a reality. It required sacrifices, compromises, and a lot of patience. At first, I struggled with balancing everything. I had my business to run, my family to care for, and all these new responsibilities that came with being in a serious, committed relationship. I found myself slipping into old habits, working late into the night, prioritizing my career over everything else. But Emily wouldn't let me. She would remind me gently but firmly that we needed to prioritize our time together, that our relationship deserved to be nurtured just as much as my work did, and so, I began to make small changes. I learned to leave work at the office, to disconnect from my emails and phone calls in the evenings, and to truly be present with Emily. Those small adjustments made a huge difference in our relationship. It wasn't about how many hours I spent at work or how much money I made. It was about showing up for her, being there in the ways that truly mattered. Still, even with the effort I was putting into our relationship, life wasn't going to let up. Emily and I faced difficulties that tested our commitment to each other. There were family disagreements, financial pressures, and moments when we were just too tired to put in the effort. But in those tough moments, we didn't let the challenges break us. We leaned on each other, we communicated, and we reminded ourselves of why we were in this together. There were times when we both questioned whether we could really make it. Could we truly balance our dreams and aspirations with the reality of our everyday lives? Would we always find a way to keep the spark alive in the face of challenges? But every time I doubted, Emily would remind me of how far we'd already come. We had weathered storms before, and we could weather whatever came next. One of the biggest challenges we faced was the pressure to have it all. People would often tell us that we should be doing more, achieving more, or reaching some sort of success that society defined. But Emily and I both knew that true success wasn't about checking off boxes on a list. It was about finding happiness, about creating a life we loved, and about being authentic to ourselves. We learned to block out the noise, to ignore the expectations of others, and to focus on what truly mattered: our relationship, our well-being, and our shared vision for the future. I remember one night, after a particularly stressful week, Emily looked at me and said something that stuck with me. "We don't need to be perfect. We just need to keep showing up for each other, every day. That's all that matters." Her words hit me hard. I had spent so much of my life trying to be perfect, trying to live up to some ideal that I thought would bring me happiness. But in that moment, I realized that the perfection I was searching for wasn't in achievements or success. It was in the imperfect, messy moments we shared. Those were the moments that truly mattered. As time passed, I began to see how much we had grown, both individually and as a couple. The challenges didn't stop coming, but our ability to face them together had strengthened. We had built a foundation based on trust, respect, and love, and no matter what life threw our way, I knew we had the tools to face it, and through it all, I saw how much Emily had changed me. She had helped me let go of the need for validation from external sources. She had shown me that I didn't need to chase after status or success to feel worthy. My worth came from within, and so did my happiness. She taught me the power of presence, of showing up, of being there, of listening, of understanding. She helped me realize that the love we shared was a partnership, not just a romantic ideal. It was about working together, making compromises, and building something lasting. Through Emily, I learned that love is a constant journey. It's not something that you achieve once and for all, but something that you build on every day. Love is about showing up for the small moments, the quiet gestures, and the shared experiences. It's about learning how to handle the tough times without letting them define you. It's about growing together, even when life seems to be pulling you in different directions. As we continued to build our future, I knew that whatever challenges we faced, we would face them side by side. We had already proven to each other that love was not about avoiding difficulty. It was about facing it with resilience, with patience, and with unwavering support for one another. And with every day that passed, I knew in my heart that this was the love I had always been searching for. The love I had once believed was unattainable, the love I had once doubted would ever come into my life, was right here. And as I looked into Emily's eyes, I realized that everything I had gone through had led me to this moment. To her. To us. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. It's easy to think that once you find happiness, you can just coast, that the struggles will slow down. But what I've learned is that real growth comes not from avoiding difficulties, but from how you handle them when they inevitably appear. And through every hardship, Emily and I became more resilient, more connected, and more certain that we could weather anything together. It was about a year into our life together when the first major storm hit. I had built my business from the ground up, and for a while, things were going smoothly. But out of nowhere, we hit a financial crisis. The market fluctuated, contracts were delayed, and I was left scrambling to keep everything afloat. There were sleepless nights, endless phone calls, and constant stress. I tried to protect Emily from the worst of it, but it was impossible not to show the strain. I remember one night when we were sitting on the couch, barely speaking to each other. I could tell she was worried, but I didn't want to burden her with the full extent of the situation. I tried to reassure her, but I could see the fear in her eyes, and it ate away at me. I'd promised her a life of stability, but here I was, failing her. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending everything was okay. Then Emily did something that changed everything. She reached out and took my hand. "Michael," she said quietly, "I know this is hard. But we're in this together, okay? We'll figure it out. I believe in us." Her words weren't just comforting, they were a lifeline. They reminded me that no matter how bad things got, I didn't have to face them alone. Emily wasn't just my partner in the good times, she was my rock when things got tough. And that's when I realized something important. Love isn't just about standing by each other when everything is perfect, it's about being there when things fall apart and working through the mess together. That was the turning point for me. I started to lean on Emily more, to be open with her about my struggles. It wasn't easy, there's a part of me that wants to protect the ones I love, to shield them from the weight of my problems. But Emily showed me that we were stronger together, and that I didn't have to carry the burden alone. She didn't judge me for my fears, instead, she gave me the space to feel vulnerable and encouraged me to take action. We put together a plan. Emily helped me brainstorm ways to cut costs, to renegotiate contracts, to bring in new clients. We worked late into the night, but I wasn't working alone anymore. She was right there beside me, offering her insights and supporting me in ways I never thought possible. And slowly but surely, We started to see results. The business stabilized, and we were able to get back on track. But the real lesson wasn't in the financial recovery, it was in how we handled the situation. Through the stress, the late nights, the constant worry, we never lost sight of each other. We communicated openly, worked together, and trusted each other. The adversity didn't tear us apart, it brought us closer. After the crisis passed, I reflected on everything we had gone through. The hard times hadn't broken us, they had strengthened us. We had been tested in ways I hadn't imagined, and yet we came out on the other side even more united. The love we had for each other was no longer just a feeling, it had become a foundation. We had built something real, something unshakable. In those months, I also realized something about myself. I had always thought I had to do it all alone. I had believed that strength meant not needing help, that relying on others made me weak. But Emily taught me that true strength comes from vulnerability, from being able to lean on someone you trust, from being open to support and love even when you feel like you're falling apart. As we moved forward, life didn't stop throwing challenges our way. But each time we faced adversity, I felt more confident that we could handle it. I was no longer afraid of the obstacles that might come our way. Instead, I saw them as opportunities for growth, both individually and as a couple. And each time we overcame a hurdle, I became more grateful for Emily, more thankful for the way she had shown me what love really meant. It wasn't about avoiding hardship, but about how we faced it, how we worked together, and how we supported each other through it all. I remember one evening, after another long day of work and stress, Emily turned to me and smiled. "We've got this, Michael," she said, as if she were speaking not just to me but to our future. "We've always had this." And in that moment I knew that no matter what came next, we were ready. Because love, real love, isn't about avoiding life's challenges. It's about facing them together, with the knowledge that as long as you have each other, you can overcome anything. As I stand here today, looking back on everything I've gone through with Emily, it's hard to believe how far we've come. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was struggling to hold on to my dreams while trying to figure out how to be the man she deserved. I often thought that love was about grand gestures or having everything figured out, but now I know better. Love isn't just about those perfect moments. It's about showing up every single day, even when life gets tough, and choosing to fight for the relationship that means the most. When we first started out, it was all about passion and excitement, the thrill of new love, the dreams of a perfect future together. But what I didn't realize at the time was that those first moments were just the beginning. The real journey came later. It was the sleepless nights spent worrying about our future, the hard conversations when we were both too scared to admit how we were feeling, the quiet moments when we didn't have answers, but we still held on. I used to think that my success or failure was solely on my shoulders. That if I didn't have the perfect career, the ideal financial situation, the right status, then I wasn't enough. But Emily taught me something I never could have learned on my own, that I am enough. That we are enough. We don't need everything to be perfect, we just need each other. The love we've built together isn't dependent on how much money we make or what society thinks of us. It's about the connection we share, the trust we've cultivated, and the commitment to stand by each other, no matter what. After all the struggles, all the uncertainty, I've come to realize that love doesn't solve everything, but it makes life worth living. It's the foundation that keeps you grounded, the fuel that pushes you to become a better version of yourself. And through it all, Emily has been there, not as a passive observer, but as my equal, my partner, my best friend. Together, we've faced down fears, doubts, and the weight of expectations. But we've done it together. As I look ahead now, I see a future that's still uncertain, still full of challenges, but also filled with possibility. I've learned to let go of the need for control, to stop trying to solve everything on my own, and to trust in the journey we're on. With Emily by my side, I'm no longer afraid of what comes next. Because I know that no matter what happens, we'll face it together. Just like we've always done. I know I've grown into someone who's more patient, more understanding, and more willing to embrace the messy parts of life. And I can see that Emily has grown with me. We've evolved as individuals, but we've also grown as a couple. Our bond is deeper than ever before, built on a foundation of shared experiences, mutual respect, and an unshakable trust. We've learned that love is not something that just happens, it's something you build, one day at a time, with intention and care. I used to be afraid of what the future held, afraid of failure, of falling short, of not being enough. But now, as I stand here, I realize that the only thing I really need to fear is letting go of what we've built. Because this, what we have, what we've created together, is more than enough. And so, with Emily beside me, I feel ready for whatever comes next. Together, we'll continue to face life's challenges side by side. I don't need to have all the answers anymore. I just need to know that we'll keep choosing each other, every single day, through all of the ups and downs. That's what love is. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey, and knowing that you've found the person you want to take that journey with. As the years go by, I know we'll continue to change, continue to evolve, and continue to grow. But as long as we're in this together, there's nothing we can't handle. Emily is my partner, my equal, and the love of my life. And together, we'll keep moving forward, ready for the next chapter, ready for the next adventure, ready for whatever life brings. Because no matter what happens, I know that we are stronger than anything life can throw our way. This is our new beginning. And I wouldn't want to start it with anyone else.